Lovely, thanks for everybody for sharing. So it's 10:30, so let's get started. Once again, thanks to everybody for putting details in the chat. If you're just joining, feel free to share. And welcome to the latest webinar in our series, Upshot Community Webinars. Yes, my name's Lynn Wilson, and today I'll be sharing the screen with my colleague Paul Beecroft. And we'll be looking at some of the privacy features that are part of Upshot, some of which have been added recently. So as we go through, some of what we're going to show you today is a little bit complex. So we want to go through it nice and slowly and show you all the implications. It might not be possible to get back to you on all your questions, but please, please, please do put them in the chat. And if we can't deal with them during the call, we'll be very happy to follow up with you, and we definitely will follow up with you after the call. So we'll keep you on mute. A lot of you have been on Zoom calls, I'm sure, a lot, and when you've got quite a few people, as we have today, which is great, it's difficult for everybody to be heard. So we're using the chat function as we found that that's the most effective. We will be recording the session, so you can share it with your team, your colleagues afterwards, and we will be putting that on our website as well. One other important piece to mention is, as we do with all these webinars, we're sharing ideas with you today. Every Upshot client is different. Everybody that's using the system uses it in a slightly different way. So, can be used in a variety of ways. So please do check with your team, your funders, your manager, whoever you think is appropriate before you implement any of the things that we're suggesting. This means that you're making sure that it's appropriate for the way that you report and the way that you work with Upshot. So our agenda today will cover some features that are available straight away to all organisations, and so we'll start off with restricted timeline events, which we touched on in our timeline events webinar. We'll also look at some customised fields and how those can be restricted to projects. So a lot of what you'll see today is to do with the fact that you may have more than one project. If you only have one project at the moment, but you're interested in expanding or want to have that conversation with us, I think you'll still find it interesting and see what the possibilities are going forward. And then we'll focus in on restricted attendee profiles, which is one of the largest developments that we've done on the system. And that has to be enabled centrally by Upshot for each organisation. So do have that conversation with us if you're interested, and we'll be going through it in detail today, but it probably needs a follow-up conversation. It's a really interesting one, and one which enables organisations to to manage the privacy really effectively. So just as I always say, at this time, Upshot is operational, fully operational. We're all on the phones and answering emails, even providing training or consultancy to organisations. Please do get in touch if you need any help, or even just to let us know how you're getting on. The support email and telephone number are, as usual, at the top of every page. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Paul, who's going to guide us through some of these features around attendee privacy.
Cool. Thanks, Lynn. So hi, everyone. I'm going to take you through 3 options for delivery organisations, the ones that Lynn outlined on that first slide that can improve or increase attendee privacy for your organisation. So the first 2 are accessible to organisations straight away, and then the restricted attendee profiles that Lynn mentioned there we'll cover in more detail later, but it has to be turned on by ourselves in the background. So we'll cover that one a little bit later, but the first 2, like I say, can be actioned really straight away by yourselves following this call. So first off, I'm going to talk about restricted timeline events, and these are sometimes known as private timeline events as well. Timeline events was actually the focus of the feature of our last webinar 2 weeks ago. It was actually covered in a lot more detail there. And what I would say is, if you have any questions following this, you're not really sure what timeline events are, by all means refer back to that previous webinar on our website as well that takes you through it in a bit more detail. I'm going to focus on something very specific today. For anyone just not familiar, an individual's timeline can actually be a great way of measuring someone's progress outside of just saying that Kieran in this instance actually attends sessions. It can be really helpful to detail any milestones or important notes, like I say, outside of him just coming along to one of my sessions. It can be really helpful when looking to see the change that you've made with that individual and helping to build up a case study. What I want to show here is, like I say, that just restricted timeline event feature. So when I go to add a timeline event to Kieran's profile, let's say I go to add an accommodation status, what you find is that obviously you can choose them from the second drop down, and you guys might have custom timeline events as well. But obviously sometimes these notes or this bit of information actually may be more of a slightly sensitive nature. So for example, if this was accommodation status and it was in care, we were actually maybe recording that Kieran had gone back to living in care. Maybe Kieran had fallen out with his family over recent days. Obviously, the notes could be as much or as little detail as you want there, but we know from our chats with organisations, maybe organisations that are doing something similar to this example here, or especially where they may be doing one-to-one work, these notes can actually be quite sensitive information. And actually what that means is, yes, you want to record on the system. You want it there, like I say, when you're looking to build up a case study on that individual, but it's actually not relevant for all your users on your Upshot account. So a user is anyone that logs in, like myself here, to actually be able to see and report on that information. So this is why we have this new setting, or relatively new setting here at the bottom. So it's called restricted access. As it says there, it is optional. If you don't select anything here, it will be accessible like normal. But what you can do here is to say, okay, only these people, so only myself and maybe Jesse, should be able to see this information on Kieran's profile and maybe be able to report on it going forward. This is just a really good way of just restricting down that more sensitive information on a profile. If I save this now, what we'll notice here on Kieran's timeline is, because this event does have some restricted setting, it's got this kind of like eye symbol here. You can see when I hover over, we get a little bit of an explanation there around what this actually means. Because I have access to it, I get the full eye showing. I can see the timeline event type, I can see the value, which is in care, and I can see any notes associated with that. And I can also see who's updated the access restrictions. Just to show you a comparison here, if it was a timeline event, a private timeline event where I hadn't been given access, you'll see the difference here. So I have this cross line through. It might be that Kieran's been referred from somewhere. I don't maybe need to see that information. I don't maybe need to know that information. Again, that might be sensitive if they've maybe come from a social worker or something on those lines. You'll see here that I know the timeline event exists, but I can't actually see the value, so the key information, and I can't see any of the notes around that as well. So that can be a really good first way of just locking down some maybe more sensitive information on your individuals. The second thing I want to show is where you can actually restrict certain custom fields to projects that users work in. So just to make that clear first off, every user, most of you will probably be familiar with this, every user when they log in, they have access to certain projects. And this can be a really good way of splitting up who sees what in the first place. So as a user here, when I'm logged in, I have access to these 3 projects. On my registration form, obviously it begins with kind of like the Upshot default sort of demographic information. Again, you can choose whether this is displayed or hidden, some of these fields. But the key point here is at the bottom. So organisations often have their own custom fields here. These can be a wide variety of things, but actually what they sometimes might contain is sensitive information or information that's only relevant to attendees from certain projects. What you can actually do now is you can restrict these custom fields to certain projects, which means that only users associated to that project will be able to see this field, add data against it, and report on it. So for instance, if I'm logged in, because I have access to the Education Employment Project, I see this field. If it's a new attendee or I'm updating an existing attendee, I can edit this field here. If someone else logs in, they don't have access to this project, they won't see this field, they won't be able to report on it. So it can be a really nice way. It might be something like current employment status. That's a little bit more sensitive, for example. It's only relevant to the people working my education and employment project, not relevant to my guys in the sports project. I can just kind of, again, lock this information down. Certain people then can't see that and report on it. So that's kind of two examples of what can be done. This one, by the way, in terms of actually restricting fields to certain project and choosing what's displayed on this registration field, can be sorted by users with full access to the admin tab, and they can do this under data display options. As some of you may have recognized there as well, that if you actually start to restrict some of these fields to certain projects, it can be a really good way of narrowing down or shortening this registration form. You might have lots of custom fields at the bottom. Obviously, our example here only has the 4 fields. I know organizations that have been using the system for a long time. They have lots and lots of fields here. And actually, it might be quite helpful that some of them are just restricted to certain projects, so that when users actually log in and actually adding new participants to the system, they only see the relevant fields that they need. Like I say again, it is accessible via the admin tab to make these changes. There is an admin guide in the support section, but of course, any questions, by all means, just give us a ring or drop us an email. So like I say, this one and the private timeline events are 2 great and immediate quick wins that organizations could take on board really straight away here. Some of you with perhaps a keener eye here will have probably noticed in the top left-hand corner, I had this little lock symbol next to my Upshot logo. It's probably a bit different to what you have on yours. And this actually is an indication of this last and this bigger feature that we want to talk about, called Restricted Attendee Profile, sometimes called RAP for short, makes it a little bit easier for us here. What that lock symbol in the top left just indicates whether this setting is switched on or off. Like we say, it is something that's done in the background, and it will be well worthwhile that if this is of interest and you like some of the ideas presented here, again, it's free to use, but it's just something that we turn on. So have a chat with the team or your relevant account manager, and we can work out how it could kind of work best for you. I just want to give you some context on this feature first of all, and why it's actually been developed. Like I say, it is one of the biggest developments that we have done to the system. So one of the features of Upshot is that attendees sit above the project level. So attendees, when added, they sit above my different projects. And this is because for many organizations, it's desirable that a service user or participant actually engages with you in multiple projects over time. So a key part of the narrative can be that Joe Bloggs, first off, he comes along to my sports project, but then he also starts working with the education and employment team. And that's actually a real positive. And that's, shows really good work that we've done there. But increasingly, we've actually had some really great feedback and insight from organizations that in some instances, their projects are very separate areas of work with maybe very different attendees, users that only have access to one of these projects. And actually, they didn't want those users only associated to one of these projects to be able to access the full details on individuals they don't work with or interact with on a regular basis. And so this is the thinking behind this development. And so like I say, we developed this feature called Restricted Attendee Profiles that was launched in November of last year. This still enables you to have attendees that engage in multiple projects, but what you can now do is restrict those attendees to certain projects. This means that only users associated with those projects will have full access to attendees restricted to that project and complete all actions with them on the system. Users not associated with that project will only see limited information on the restricted attendees profile and complete limited actions with them on the system. And again, just to stress there, we're obviously going to run through an example, but don't worry if you can't remember everything from today. This is all being recorded and the link will be shared. As well as this, we're going to send out a guide following this, so you can maybe have a look through that and take it back to your team. And like I say, we're more than welcome to have the discussions as well. So let's demonstrate how this works. So as this works by what project users have access to, I'm going to show 2 different users. So if we think first off, obviously I'm logged in as myself and I have access to these 3 projects. If I now bring up another user as well, so let me just split my screen here. I hope you guys can see that okay. So like I say, on the left-hand side of the screen now, we see myself logged in. I have access to all 3 projects. Whereas on the right-hand side, I'm logged in as my colleague Sarah, and Sarah actually has only has access, sorry, to the community project. So you see that slight difference there straight away. Obviously, when Sarah logs in, she only sees the 1 project. I see my 3. So let's explain how this works in detail now. So if we go to an individual profile, so we can make project restrictions for attendees either at the individual level, or we can do it in bulk as well via the people report. So if we go to Kieran's profile now, first off, it's important to point out that even though I've got this restricted access setting on, Kieran's profile at the moment just works like normal. You know, this is exactly kind of what you'd see if you logged in on your account as usual. And this is actually an important point. Just because the wrap setting, so just because this restricted attendee profile setting is turned on, it does not mean that every individual needs to be restricted. It might just be the case that you run a counselling or a therapy project, and it maybe makes sense to restrict these particular individuals' details. But for other attendees, it's fine to leave it as it is. And again, it's good to kind of have that chat maybe with one of the team and work out what would work best. Anyway, let's work through this example here. So if I now go, what you'll notice is that we have this extra project restrictions button. So what I can see here at the moment is that Kieran currently has no project restrictions. As we explained, this is why the profile just looks like normal. What I can do here, so I'm logged in as myself, Paul, is I can say, okay, Kieran's information needs to be restricted to these 2 projects. They're the only projects that Kieran's been attending, and I know that they're the only projects that he's interested in. My community work is quite separate. He's not going to be attending that. They don't need access to his full information. It's just the sports project users and the education and employment users. So like I say, I'm restricting Kieran's information to just users associated with those 2 projects. And I say save project restrictions. Again, it lets me know when these have last been updated and by what users as well. Like I say, again, we've gone to an individual's profile here, but this can be done in bulk via the people report as well. So what I want to show now, what I highlight here, is obviously, if you remember, when I'm logged in as myself, I have access to that sports and education project. So what I'm seeing now is a slight difference, only really this look in the top left-hand side. Again, you do get some hover text around this indicating what it means. So what this is telling us is that Kieran has been a restricted profile. He has been restricted to certain projects, but because I have access to those projects, because I'm a user associated with the sports project and the education project, I can see his full information. Let's now stress and let's kind of notice the difference here. So if we go to Sarah, and she actually logs in, and she's then looking for Kieran's profile, she starts to see some very basic information. So I'm just going to minimize this and just focus now on purely what Sarah sees on this restricted attendee. Remember, Sarah only has access to my community project, and Kieran has been restricted to the education, employment and sports project. So Sarah is someone that doesn't have access to those projects, so can't see his full details. She sees this bare minimum of information on Kieran. And the reason that she sees this bare minimum is because, importantly, actually, one of the actions that Sarah can still complete, she could add Kieran to a register if needed, if he did actually attend my community project at some point, and we'll touch on this a bit later. But she actually maybe just needs to be able to identify which is the correct Kieran. Imagine here if you had like 2 or 3 Tom Smiths, you wanted to work out which is the correct one. With this minimum of information, you should be able to work that out. So let's kind of now stress on the different bits and pieces, how this makes it different in terms of her interactions and what she can see and do with Kieran's profile. First off, obviously, you probably noticed this red lock symbol. We see this very basic profile. You see this explanation on the right about what this all means, and we'll touch on how you can request access, like full access to their details later on. But I want to touch on the different bits and pieces now that you can't do. So you'll notice that we no longer have that timeline events button or the session report. So I can no longer view existing timeline events for Kieran Dyer, and I can no longer add new ones. I don't interact with this attendee on a regular basis, so I shouldn't need to be able to do that. That's why I'm obviously not included. This is why it's been restricted in this way. So like I say, you don't see that session report and obviously that project restrictions button. I can't make these changes for Kieran either. In addition, some other areas where this makes a change. So if we go to my media library, so go to evidence and show media, I can no longer search for Kieran in my attendees. I can no longer filter this library down to see any files that are attached to Kieran. I can't select from him from this filter here that works alphabetically. Kieran isn't shown. So this can be a really helpful step as well. In addition to that, if we take another example on the system, so if we go to surveys, so if we take the Warwick Edinburgh Wellbeing Scale, what we see here is actually, if we go into the baseline deployment of this, Kieran, as we can see, has completed his survey, but I can no longer, because I don't have full access to Kieran, I can no longer view his results, like I could view Tony's results there, and I could no longer, in the download of my results, it wouldn't show Kieran's results either. In addition to that, if we go back one step, if it was then maybe submitting on behalf of an individual, you'll see again that I can't do that. So Kieran actually hasn't completed the follow-up survey at this point, indicated by this red exclamation mark, but I can no longer complete on his behalf as I can with Anna. In addition to this, I can't actually send him a survey. So whether that be by email or just attaching it to his profile, I can't add Kieran in that way as before. I want to touch on how this affects reporting, because obviously something that's probably going through a lot of your minds at this time. So reports on Upshot, when you think about it, can probably be broken down into two different ways. So ones that maybe actually include attendees' sort of personal information, maybe personal identifiers, and ones that are just purely numeric results. So the ones that give you purely numeric results, so the number of people attending an activity or number of people with a certain timeline event, that don't actually give you the names of the individuals, you can't take that back down and work out that's Kieran's profile. Those ones, you will still be able to run your reports as normal. So the statistics report, the timeline events, and the measured indicators, they will all still give Sarah the correct numbers if she looks to run these reports, because she can't identify that that's Kieran's profile. So it's still fine for her to get the correct numbers when reporting. The key difference is when we talk about things maybe such as the people report. So the people report, as you guys will know, features a range of criteria. We can really narrow it down to actually meet individuals that match that criteria. And it can be all these kind of demographic fields at the top, bits around attendance, and then at the bottom it can also be different bits and pieces around your custom fields. Now, you know that if you run a people report, when you hit go, you actually get the names of the individuals when you run that report. So that isn't appropriate if you don't have access to Kieran's profile. You see here that we kind of get this warning the whole time while we're on the people report that we actually don't have, if you don't have full access to individuals, they won't appear in your results. And if you think about it, that doesn't make sense, right? You shouldn't be able to run a filter maybe around disability or ethnicity, maybe around your custom fields, and then get Kieran appear at the bottom when you don't actually have full access to his profile and that information. That wouldn't make sense, and that's why you can't see that here. In addition, on the attendance report, where you get the option to actually include personal details with this tick box at the bottom, if Kieran has attended maybe some of your sessions, that's fine, Kieran will appear, but you won't get any of that restricted information still come out. So like I say, there's, kind of helpful to think about the reporting in Upshot in the two different ways. Once we get the pure numbers, you'll still get all the correct information that way. But when it comes to thing where we're identifying personal individual details, we won't actually get Kieran appear in those results. And this kind of leads on to a final point, that actually what's crucial then, and you probably realize this as we've gone along, so what's actually crucial is that users have access to the correct projects. So like we said, Sarah only has access to the community project. If Sarah is a user that needs to be able to report across all your projects at an organization level, if you are running this wrap setting, if you are running this restricted attendee profile setting, it's important most likely that Sarah is actually made a project manager for all of the different projects that are taking place, so she can report fully at all times. And you probably have a couple of users in your account that need to be able to do that. And system admins can always change the project associations for a user at any time under the admin tab. Again, that's covered in the admin guide, but like I say, if we have that conversation, we'll explain that in more detail. In addition to this, something that's probably crossed your mind as well is, what if Kieran does start attending my community project now? What actually happens then? So I'm, like I say, we're still logged in as Sarah, and actually Kieran comes along. So, okay, if we take the example that maybe Kieran attended this online youth club session, like I mentioned earlier, even if they're a restricted profile, you can still add them to sessions. So I can still add Kieran to a session here. You'll see he's been added in here. And that's important, right? Because we don't want to stop your delivery staff being able to go about completing their registers. It's obviously like a core aspect of the system. It's really key for you guys to track and report on. And you don't want to stop them be able to do that and those figures don't match up. So, okay, that's fine. We can see Kieran's been added to the register. And when Sarah clicks on his profile, again, she still sees that very limited information. And that might be fine as it is. She might just need just that very limited information. She knows it's the right Kieran she's got in her register there, and you can carry on going. But potentially, because Kieran actually now attends this youth club, he's now attending this project, it might be really helpful for Sarah and her delivery team to actually see the full details on Kieran, because she maybe wants to know about any medical conditions that he might have, or adding timeline events might be a key aspect, or surveys, for example, all the reporting points that we talked about. So what she can easily do, if you go to Kieran's profile, you'll see here, and I mentioned this briefly earlier on, that on the right-hand side, you can request full access. So rather than just seeing this limited information, we actually, or Sarah actually, would now like to see Kieran's full details. That would be really helpful for her team at the community project. We actually want Kieran to be restricted to the community project as well as these two, so we can see all of those details. So what we can do is we can click on this button called Request Full Access. Here, as you can see, it says you can ask another member of your organization for full access to this attendee. So this will send out an automated email. And what we notice here, if we look at this first drop down, we want Kieran's full details to be accessible now from people that work in the community project, like Sarah, so she's the one requesting the access here. And now we can choose which user to email. So what we see in this list is any users that are associated to both the community project and the education and employment and the sports project. So people that kind of can see the full details on Kieran themselves currently, and also have that ability to grant access to other projects as well. So if I choose to email that to myself, so I choose to email that to my other user called Paul, and I say request access, you'll see obviously the access request sent to Paul Beecroft. If we just minimize this for a second, just open that up. What we see here is you'll get an email similar to the below, classic Blue Peter style. Here's one that we did earlier. It will say, hi, this is my username, obviously, Paul Beecroft. It will tell me the user that is requesting access. It will tell me what I need to do to grant access and what in specific that they actually are after. So they want access to the community project for this attendee. Again, it's reiterated here. And what you'll notice here is that I can click on this link it takes me straight to the relevant page. I can make that change, so grant access to the community project and say save project restrictions. And now when Sarah logs in, she'll be able to see Kieran's full details and run those reports. So I'm aware obviously there that, and sorry, we're cutting close to the time now, that we covered quite a lot of detail, and it is a slightly more complex feature on the system. So I would stress, any questions following today's call, by all means, just get in touch. If there's questions in the chat that, like Lynn said, she hasn't been able to answer, we will follow up on them. But by all means, get in touch with us like this, and we're more than happy to talk you through it and actually what would work best for yourselves.
Hi everybody, thanks very much, Paul. Hope everybody can hear me. Just had a problem with the sound. Yeah, that was a really comprehensive and hopefully really helpful stroll through one of the most complex features, but as I say, I think it's going to be a bit of a game changer for some organizations. So that's brilliant. Thanks, Paul. So we'll follow up with you after this call. Thanks for staying with us right to the end. Sorry to be a couple of minutes over. We'll share with you a survey. We'd always love to hear your feedback. And today we showed you RAP, and that's an example of how we've developed features over the years with different users and organizations like yourself. So feel free to use the tell us your thoughts link as well, so you never know where it might lead to from there. Our next webinars are advertised on the page here now. So the next one will be around reporting, and we'll be splitting that into 2 parts. We'll be sending through details about how to join those webinars and how to register very, very shortly. But until then, thank you so much for joining today. Keep safe and keep in touch, and goodbye until the next time.